Hello, everyone, and welcome to the episode 54 of the Office Hours podcast. Today, in the first part of it, we talked about productivity and if it's all that it's cracked up to be, and distractions and habits and good habits and bad habits, and your decision-making budget and things of that nature. And second part was a little bit more technical. We're kind of talking about merits of code styles and higher order functions and whether or not doing certain things with the language is a good idea or not. So if any of those things are of interest to you, stick around and find out. So check it out. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the episode 54 of the Office Hours podcast. Mo is back with us this week, and let's see what we're going to get up to this time. Hey, Mo, how you been?
Been good. Been good. You?
Doing well, I'm by my lonesome this last week and the week ahead. So, no distractions of any kind.
That's nice.
I don't know if I'm spending my time in the most productive way, but, still pretty good.
What do you mean you're not spending your time in the most productive way?
I've been playing a lot of video games.
Listen, productivity is relative. Playing video game is also being productive. At least you are enjoying it.
Yeah. It's
You
not
know
bad.
what?
It's not bad.
You know what? Let's chat a little bit about productivity. Like, do you feel like productivity has to always be like doing something? Do you find rest to be like a form of productivity? Productivity, right? The time you spend resting. Do you
Um,
consider this time productive?
well, I mean, that's how I justify it to myself in some ways. Because sometimes it gets a little bit too much, as there are some games that you can just get sucked into and it's like, oh, I'm just gonna play for 40 minutes, and then it's like 4 hours later and you've just been playing this entire time, right? So that's clearly not ideal, even though you kind of derive a lot of enjoyment out of it in the process, but it doesn't really materialize into anything else. And sometimes you can, instead of going to sleep at reasonable hours, just like, oh, I'm just going to play another match or something, right? So that's not good either. And you
I see
kind
your
of have to
point.
keep a balance.
Okay. You know, the reason why I asked you this question is because sometimes like I have this habit, like it's like, do you call it a habit or a schedule? Like Friday evenings till like, I mean, it's the Sabbath hour. Friday evenings till like Saturday evenings. I don't do much. I just like rest, except there is something really important that I have to do. I don't. I just sleep and watch soccer and just that's it. And sometimes in the afternoons, I might be feeling guilty, like, "Ah, I should use this time. I'm just like rested." Sometimes it happens, like, even though I scheduled to use this time, I'm still feeling a bit guilty about it. Like, I want to do something. And then recently, I started to talk to myself, you know what? Not doing anything is also being productive. Like you could just exist, just not do. But the way you say it, like if you're playing game and you don't get to sleep, I think you're probably creating more problems elsewhere because then the following day you didn't rest enough.
Yeah.
And
No, I mean,
although
I know all of those things. Is that sometimes it's still, still something that one does. And I don't know. I never really chased productivity. Because I know there's some people who are obsessed, right? Uh, they're like on that grind all the time, trying to be as productive as humanly possible.
Mhm.
And, a lot of them achieve results which are really good. And, sometimes it's you like think about like, oh, how come they have all of this stuff? And it's like, yeah, but they also work so much. And I'm like, am I content with having as much stuff as I currently have and not having to work as much? And usually it's like, yeah, I'm good. I don't have to do that. But sometimes you start sort of reflecting on it. It's like, would my life be better if I like worked harder and more and like made more money and then could spend it on fancier things? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know necessarily the answer to that, because I had like periods of you know high life and periods of just like not doing anything, and I don't think that they were better. One was better than the other. Probably was better in a moment, but like reflecting back on it, like on things that happened like 10 years ago, that, oh, we went to some really fancy skiing resort in Switzerland. It's like, okay, yeah, well, that was pretty nice for those couple of days, but had it had such a massive impact on my life overall? Not really. So I'm still not quite sure if I should be, chasing that lifestyle of being that hamster in a wheel who's just constantly going for it.
I mean, there is pros and cons to it. Actually, there are different ways to look at it. Because at the end of the day, you cannot keep grinding always. You need some time off. And for example, today I was listening to a podcast and someone was saying if you are always working, you probably will miss the time where you get inspired. The inspiration period, like the time where you can actually like
Reflect.
sit,
Yeah.
reflect to actually get. So you might find like, oh yeah, you want to spend all the time being productive, getting something done, like doing something, but you need a break to be able to reflect on what you're doing to do it better. Otherwise, you just keep going. I mean, you could, but if you, I kind of understood what the person was saying,
Yeah.
like in a way, and I guess
Yeah, I have a feeling that for a lot of people, if they stop and start reflecting on their life, they probably would realize how ridiculously unhappy they are with it. So they just grind to kind of
yeah.
mask it and push that moment
Mhm.
off as much as possible, so they don't have to come to terms with it and realize like, oh my god, what I've been doing with my life. So it's just like, yeah, let's just sweep those thoughts under the rug over here and just keep on grinding because
Exactly.
it works out so much better in a short term.
Yeah.
Yeah, so could be
And
that too.
this is not fair to be honest, because at the end of the day, I feel like you probably like stealing time from yourself because if you don't reflect and you just, I guess what the person was really saying, I guess the conversation started from boredom. So the person was saying like, oh, people these days are afraid of boredom. Nobody wants to get bored.
That's true.
Like you don't want to stay in, you want the constant dopamine, like
Yes.
something, what's happening next, exciting your brain, like, and I started to sometimes I notice some things about myself. Like I get to a point where like silence can be distracting. Do you understand? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's quiet, but now it's distracting,
Yeah.
and
No,
and now I want something playing. I want some form of dopamine to like keep the
no, yeah,
machine
yeah.
going.
That is totally true. I know that like I constantly listen to something like basically the entire day. I have something playing in my ear, some kind of
Yeah.
podcast or something, right? And uh, you know, sometimes I realize like I don't really have quiet time to myself where I can just think about stuff randomly. I mean, I do. That's not entirely true. I do think about things randomly because I notice sometimes, like if I'm listening to some podcast and then I was like, oh, I've been zoning out and thinking about something completely
Yeah.
different, so
Hmm.
I didn't quite hear what they were talking about for like the last however many minutes, right? So these things do happen. It's not like this thing consumes my entire attention. But uh, you know, last year I've been burned pretty badly by using my phone in the car. I got a pretty massive ticket, so that was not fun.
Oh.
And so if I set some podcast up to listen while I drive, like I don't touch my phone while I drive. Like I try to actually be good about it. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and if I set something up and it runs out and stops, and I'm like in the middle of a drive on a highway, like I'm not gonna go for my phone like searching for something else because that doesn't end well. And then I just have the silence where it's like, well, now I have nothing in my ear, I can actually think about some random stuff. So yeah, it's true. It's true. Like I never really tried doing, some people they do like the dopamine detox or whatever.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know if
that,
that
yeah.
entire concept makes sense necessarily. Uh, it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. But it would be interesting as an experiment to try to do something like that just to see what it turns into.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
I,
I want to try it. You know what? I want to try
it's
it.
such a hard habit to break because, if and I guess technology also makes it convenient. Like I have my pair of headphones that pair automatically both to my work computer and to my phone. And so if I
Hmm.
have a meeting, the meeting goes to my headphones, and if I just, I don't know, going for a coffee, I turn something on my phone. I don't have to like switch devices at all connected directly
Ah,
to my ear
okay.
holes. And so because I have those headphones on me pretty much the entire day while I'm working, because there's calls, there's like huddles, there's all that stuff, it's just too easy to fill that silence. Like as soon as one voice in my ear disappears, it's just like, oh, let's pick the phone, find something, and cue off the next thing, right? So I think that it'll require a lot of dedication, and right now I think I'm spending that I'm spending the balance on something else that I'm trying to get in habit of. And I know that if you start doing multiple things at once that require a lot of dedication, like all of them are probably gonna fall apart. So my budget for self-control is limited right now.
Your self-control budget
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the year or for the month? Because we have a
Well,
new month starting soon.
it's like an ongoing thing. It's like the decision fatigue and forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do, or interrupting the behaviors that you want to interrupt. That like that takes. It's not free, and it's a finite amount. And so I'm spending a big chunk of it on this other thing, and so I just need to get that other thing out of the way first, and then maybe I can try this.
I'm so curious. I want to know what the other thing is. But before I ask you that,
Mm.
you want to tell the story about how you got your ticket?
I was just in traffic, and I was listening. I was looking for things to listen to. I was actually at the traffic light, so I wasn't even driving. But I was like so immersed in my phone that I did not see the cop behind me. I only basically saw him when he like
Oh,
knocked on my window.
oh.
And I realized like, oh, holy shit, I was fully sucked into it and I was not paying attention to anything around me. And it's like, that's not good if you're in a car for a
Yeah.
bunch of reasons. And, the ticket was pretty bad. Like it stung quite a lot. It's like a massive inconvenience overall. So, don't get yourself to that situation. I'm still like paying the price for it.
Do you get
But
a point deduction or something?
the whole shebang, they really, really don't like
Oh,
distracted drivers out here in British Columbia. Like not a, it's a serious thing, basically. Let me put it that way. And yeah, and I thought like, okay, granted, I did not see him coming. I was completely unaware of my surroundings at all. So it's not a good thing. And I tend to dismiss it. It's like, what's a big deal? And it's like, apparently, yeah, it's a pretty big deal. And so, I like, I mean, I still cannot completely forgo the convenience, even though like I'm not supposed to technically have a phone, whatever. But I have an old car that doesn't have a GPS, so I'm using my phone for maps. Like shit, everybody does that. But I'm trying not to interact with it as I'm driving. Like if I actually need to do something on it, I would pull over, stop, do the thing, and then resume. Which is annoying to do. It would be just much easier if I could just do it, but you know, like that's not the plan.
you don't want any more tickets. Now you're like
No, if I
following the
if I get
law.
another ticket on this thing, I'm so screwed. Like losing my license screwed. So
Oh,
yeah, like
oh,
not worth it. Absolutely not
not
worth
worth
it.
it. No,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. Anyway, yeah, fair enough. So For me, I'm gonna try to do the dopamine detox. But
Mm.
the reason why is because like I noticed something today, and it's not. It's it. Well, I find myself constantly needing something to. It's like giving adding sugar to your tea, like I mean, or to your food. Like you just want it sweet. So I think this kind of playing something in the background, I got so serious. Like now I play like podcast, videos, music, and I'm working actually. It's not like I'm watching it. It's just like it feels good to know something is going on, you know?
Yeah.
And then I started to think about it today, and then I realized I need to find a way to break this because I've done it before, like for a while to be able to.
It was much easier in the era of dial-up internet. When your minutes ran out, that
Exactly.
was it.
But
I seriously,
but
I had like the itches, I would be like, oh my god, I can't not have it, and then a few days later, it's like, okay, I'm good. Until the next time the bill got paid. But you know, it's one good thing is I like recently I had a period where I was just wasting a lot of time on like YouTube Shorts. Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
plane. Let it pass by. Yeah, I was like spending a lot of time on YouTube Shorts. And even though I set up restrictions for myself, I left myself like a kind of a backdoor so I can ignore it for most part. And eventually I was like, okay, I'm setting the restrictions for myself so I don't watch it. So if I try to bypass them every time, it's not really giving me, if it's not doing me any favors, it's kind of a waste of time. And so I turned off the bypasses. So now it's like it just shuts off. So I haven't been watching those in a while, which is good because eventually you don't have the inclination to just immediately just like, it kind
Mm-hmm.
of goes away. For the podcasts, I mean, I do enjoy the content too. So it's not like a completely useless thing that you're doing. It's not
It
just
is.
occupying the time because you do learn something out of it. It's not like just, white noise. At least that's what I think. So I think I would miss that part.
Arguably, basically, arguably, just arguably by the side. You know what? Let me tell you why. Can I tell you now?
Sure, by all means.
So, arguably because I noticed that when I actually concentrate on the podcast, I get more from it. Like I sit in front of the TV and I watch the podcast, or like I watch it. I gain things from it. Like it's like, yeah, this is good. I can actually concentrate. But if it's playing in the background, sometimes I hear like bits and pieces of. Maybe I should speak for myself. You know what? I
Yeah.
speak for myself.
Well, I'm
Sometimes,
saying like in a situation like if I'm going on a walk, I could just enjoy my walk in silence, or I can also have a podcast playing, so I kind of have a walk in terms of physical activity, and I get a podcast in terms of like just learning some new type of information that I haven't learned before. But then it's a choice between
mhm,
a physical activity plus contemplation and reflection and just enjoying, your surroundings
mhm,
and,
mhm.
communing with nature and things like that. And so the like podcast replaces one of those pieces. So again, it's like a choice. And I don't know. There's just so many things one can think about. It's really hard to get bored. But I think you have to have enough accumulated in your head to not get bored with yourself. So if from your childhood you've been growing up on a diet of TikToks and YouTube shorts, that's gonna be a really tough thing for you to
Mhm,
kick that
mhm.
particular habit.
Yeah. I'll see how it works. I will
Yeah.
try, and I will see how it works. I will really try because I think I need to. I think I indulge a lot. I let myself indulge in this kind of thing, like and it starts like I started when like I wasn't sleeping good, so I like compensate. Like I'll be like, oh yeah, if this is playing, it keeps me awake, and I can use the energy to do something else. And then I started enjoying it a bit too much, and now it's like a thing. And I don't want it to be a thing
Yeah.
because it'd be
Well,
nice.
there's this interesting idea that I've heard recently that it's like, why do we choose to waste time before going to sleep, even though we know it's not good for us? Like, just like doing shorts or Instagram or whatever you do, where with like some infinite scroll type thing. And the idea was that you dedicate so much time to your responsibilities during the day that this is like the only time where you can feel that you're in full control of what you can do. And you're like, well, this is my choice. I choose to do it because now I'm in control. Like, I'm not constrained by the fact that I have to do it for my job or I have to do it for my
Mm-hmm.
family. This is
Mm-hmm.
me time, and I control it, and I make it. I stay late and don't go to sleep because I choose to do it, which is true.
It's
Like,
true.
these days I don't really have problems falling asleep, and you know, pretty much like 3 minutes after my head hits the pillow, I'm out cold. And a bunch of years back, that used to be a big problem for me. I would like have really like bad time going to sleep. I would not fall asleep for hours and hours and hours. It's really bad. Now, not even remotely close. But I noticed that right now, sometimes I kind of dread the fact that I kind of delay the time where I go to sleep. I don't know why, but it feels like I haven't I haven't given myself everything that I wanted to get in terms of like leisure in a day, even though I definitely had like, oh man, like, yesterday been playing like
Mm.
video games for a couple hours. There's plenty time to just not do anything, you know, productive, quote unquote. And still, I have my alarm clock that tells me that I should start getting ready to go to bed, and I'm like, well, let's ignore that for now. Even though it's like I
Mm-hmm.
know really well that like if I'm not gonna get enough sleep, it's gonna suck the next day, and I still do it. So yeah, and yeah, technology just provides a lot of convenience in that regard, and I find that any tool that supposedly restricts you from doing something for your own good, if it has any kind of means of bypass, it will be immediately bypassed, and you just learn how to bypass it trivially in like first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you need one of those time unlock safes that you just like drop your phone into and close it, and then it opens up the next morning, and you just can't get
Yeah,
access to it the
absolutely.
entire time. But
Yeah.
then everyone will like, oh, but what about emergencies? And it's like, well, yeah, there's emergencies, and like I kind of have to have access to it, and that whole thing falls apart like a house of cards.
As there what this, when people say emergencies, right? I mean, knock on the wood, God forbid,
Yeah.
there's no emergency, but is it really for emergency or because I noticed the brain is very smart on its own. It will bring up scenarios why let's say you lock your phone somewhere, yeah,
Yeah.
and you're like, yeah, you want to do like full focus and you want to concentrate. Your brain is going to find you a reason to
Yeah.
go pick up that phone.
Absolutely.
Just
Absolutely.
it's not
100%.
even true. It's not even true. It's gonna tell you something like, "Oh, yeah, did you hear that?" Or like something. So,
It is true.
something.
Yeah.
So when people say emergency, I don't really think it's for emergency. I think this is just one of these
Yeah.
tricks,
If my brain was as good at making me do things as opposed to not do things or waste my time, I'd be probably richer than Elon Musk right now.
Yeah, like these things happen, like it just brings up like the most interesting scenarios.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just laughing on my way to finally picking up the phone because I'm like, well, you win, because maybe this is true. But anyway, we're gonna try. On the other note, I wanted to I came across a blog um earlier, and I wanted to share it with you. It was about a senior software engineer interview, and he did the interview was a technical question basically this guy had like um a function within a function. So there is a function that has a parameter. I'm gonna paint the picture for you verbally. So he has a function. Next time we probably can put a picture somewhere, but uh, but he has a function that has a parameter, and in that function has another function that has another parameter, and there was another function in that function. So it was weird. And for me, the first thing the question was supposed to be like for this guy to find like the problem. So the third function was a
Mhm.
set timeout. Was a set timeout question.
Okay, so
Like it
it's a
was a
Java,
set
it's a
timeout question.
JavaScript thing. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So when I saw it at first, the first thing that came to my mind is, ew, why do you have why do you have a function and a function? Like, I mean, I mean, why? So I wanted to ask you, but turns out like the answer to the guy was saying like it was a Atlassian interview. This Jira guy,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
so um I wanted to ask you like how do you feel about this type of writing, like this concept of like, you know, doing things?
Well,
I mean,
like
why? Just
high
why?
high order functions is kind of bread and butter of JavaScript in a lot of ways.
Hmm, you could do without it, no?
You could, but why would you? It's such a powerful instrument, you know?
Explain, please. Help me to understand it.
Well, so if we go into the domain of functional programming, functions that can take functions as parameters or that can return other functions as return values is a perfectly normal thing. And in fact, uh, you know,
No, no, it's not the same thing. So like there is a so for this is different. Like if you have a function
yeah,
that is accepting another function as a parameter,
yeah,
this is different.
right,
But you have a function,
yeah.
a full function with the execution, like curly bracket, and then you write another function inside that function.
Right. Well, I mean, probably he's just leveraging it for closures. Like, I this I'm not particularly a fan of because your inner function gets access to the scope of the outer function and all of the outer scopes going as
Mm-hmm.
far as global object, right? So that's how closures work in JavaScript. You can capture the scope of your outer function in your inner function so
Mm-hmm.
that you can get access to the variables that were defined in your outer scopes without having to pass them explicitly. And I'm not a big fan of that because it makes it really hard to refactor because like if you pull that function out and move it elsewhere, now it's like, oh, what is this variable? What is that variable? Because now they're out of scope, so you have to still like rewire them to be passed explicitly. Sometimes it's helpful if you don't want to have like a function with like 15 different parameters just because all of the things that this function is working with are captured in the closure. So it really depends on the context and what exactly he was trying to do. And like even today I was like refactoring a bunch of tests and in React when you're testing and your code depends on a bunch of providers. Even your test subject you have to wrap in all of the providers so like it gets access to the data that it needs. And having to write for every test, having to write like a 6-line render function that like wraps a bunch of providers is kind of a pain in the ass. So in one level up around your test, you just create a helper and that has a bunch of stuff captured in your closure, and then you just call that, and it just makes the code more readable and simple. So it really depends on how it's being used and abused. As with any
So
tool, you can use it for really crappy purposes or not.
so for me, I would prefer, say, let's say you can create like the function separately. I you can call a function in a function. Say for
Yeah.
example, like you have the function and then you can create like a skeletal function, and that you can call that will be taking the parameters from the parent function
Yeah.
and using it in the call for the child function, let's say.
Right.
So for me, I would appreciate this kind of architecture. But if I open someone's code and I see a full-fledged function inside a function, I mean, I used to do this when, like, way back, like when, I mean, I say I did this when we're like doing C++, but then I did not really have like a lot of, it wasn't school programming and like it wasn't like a complex enterprise level programming. So I don't know if you do this on the enterprise level, like how it will be received. And just my opinion. And the fact that
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
saw it like an interview question, and when the guy was talking about the actual answer to the question, nobody said anything about having a different. And
Because
again, maybe it's
it's
just
totally normal in JavaScript. I'm actually pretty surprised that you treat it that way.
I just don't like the idea. This is me. This is my opinion. Like it's just my opinion, right?
Yeah,
Like so,
no.
there's certain things. There's just certain things like you know you could do without it.
But
It's
I
not.
don't know. To me, it almost feels like, you're driving in a car and you're like, I really like the car, but this gear shifter, I don't want to use that thing. Like, I'll just drive in first the entire time because it works. The car drives. It's like, yeah, but if you
Mhm.
use the gear shifter, you expand the range of applicability of your car. So it's a tool that you have to learn how to utilize properly. And you're free to not use it. It's totally fine. But even if you have like a React component that has like an on-click callback and you pass an arrow function into it, that's a function inside a function. Like what are you gonna do, right?
Yeah, this is different. So, like, you see, in one of those functions, there was a set timeout function. The set timeout is an arrow function, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's okay. I mean, even this, I'm still, I can accept this a little. So, if I'm doing someone's review,
right.
I'm speaking from like, I'm doing the code review, and I see this. This is something I will point out because I know you could create the function in a way that it's skeletal, and then you can pass the parameter like the
Yeah,
data from the main function when
yeah,
you call it where you actually have the
yeah.
real
I th-
data.
I
So
think
like,
I think in this particular case, because it's set timeout specifically, there are JavaScript gotchas, right? Because if you define that function outside and you pass it to set timeout, unless you bind it, it's gonna lose its scope, and you're not gonna get the effect that you want. And so having an arrow function inside a set timeout is perfectly legal. In fact, before it was a massive pain to keep track of your scope and like rebind things and do this and do that. So having automatically bound scopes with arrow functions to your current scope is like really invaluable. Which again, you just need to be aware of the differences in behavior between like the plain function and arrow functions. So I would say I'd
yeah,
have to see the exact specific example to kind of
you know what?
pass judgments on it.
Yeah, I will send it to you. I saw it, and that was the first thing that spoke out to me. I was just like, why would he even do this? Like,
Yeah.
why? I mean,
I
this is
guess
just me.
send it to me. I can take a look at it, and then I can attach the link in the description.
Yeah,
So if people have their own ideas about it, they can leave a comment or something like that.
yeah, yeah, for sure, we could do this because, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying the code won't work. I'm not saying it's a totally bad idea or something like this. I'm just coming from a place of readability,
Hmm.
like if you have a complex function,
Readability is a skill issue.
if you have a complex function, like let's say your function is like what? It's already like 5 lines or 6 lines. Okay, and I'm being nice here. Let's even say you have like almost 6, 7 lines of function, and then you have another function inside that. You're already looking at all the behavior that's happening in this function. Now you realize that there's another function going on in here.
Yeah.
Why?
It really depends. It really depends.
It really depends,
For some
I
cases,
guess.
if you read Carmack about his work on Quake, I believe during his time at id, he was saying like, I'd rather prefer to have all of the code to fit in one function on one screen than to have a function that calls 5 other things that I have to individually go and look up what they do. And when I come back to the main function, I lose that context. So I constantly have to like jump back and forth, as opposed to just, okay, it's a long function, it's 50 lines, but like all of the code is right there on one screen. I can read it in its entirety and understand what it does without having to context switch every time. And there's something to
Yeah.
be said about that too. Like
You know what?
if you're not reusing that function more than 3 times, like inline it, it's not that big of a deal. I think that the dry principle, people sometimes they kind of get too overboard, and then you just have like it's the same representation as like the whole debacle with npm, where there's just like a package for everything. Even if it's like a one-liner, there's a package for it. It's like, don't use a package, just write the function yourself. What's the big deal?
There is a big deal.
It is a big deal. Like, I don't know, was it last episode when we were talking about it, where it was like the guy removed a package called isNumber that checked if a variable was the number, and it like saves 400 gigabytes of traffic a month in just npm traffic. Like, it's a big deal. Like 400 gigabytes is a lot, and there's like bajillion packages that can replaced with a one-liner. Like, I was recently looking at our code base, and we use Lodash, and Lodash is like notoriously shit for tree shaking. Like, you import one function and it just pulls the entire Lodash bundle inside of it. And I'm like, we're using literally 3 functions out of Lodash. We should just replace it with our own and not have to drag in like extra 50 kilobytes into our bundle for no good reason. But, haven't done it yet. Maybe never will, but the idea at least is there.
You mentioned something about dry, and recently I had a conversation about this recently, and the conversation was about, how you define like your global, how do you call that thing now? Public, private, and accessibility. How do you what's the, I forgot the term now.
Like access modifiers?
Yeah, like global, private, protected stuff. So
I don't use classes, so I don't.
Oh man.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
in a way, I control that through exports. So there's stuff that is exported out of a module, and there's stuff that's not. So that's like the closest equivalent that you can have to this.
Yeah, fair enough. But for this is fixed. Like you have to do an import for your export. So you have to. So because the thing this guy was saying, like we were talking about, was when you do define your, let's say you're defining a property, and you could, or a method. If you're writing a method in JavaScript, you could do like define the access modifier, like a public something. For a public method or public variable, usually by default is public. So even if you don't put public, it's still public, right?
Yeah.
But I like, again, my opinion. Yeah. I like to explicitly put this kind of things, like, so I would argue for it, because I like to have it like there, because it's cleaner, you can see it. It's not like half of the code has access modifiers, half of the code does not have anything. And it's just weird. So I like to see, I'm speaking for myself, right? So I was thinking, but the argument the person made when we're talking about it was like, oh yeah, it's dry for dry purpose. Like you don't have to put it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking like, this is too dry. I don't like this level of dryness, because I want to see it. I want to see the. If it's
Are you getting paid per word or something?
Yeah, exactly. Like this is too. It's too dry. Like
No.
I get it dry.
So my opinion on it, and again, well, first of all, private and public are like TypeScript stuff. If you want to use private in JavaScript, you have to use a different syntax that is incompatible. And TypeScript enforces it during compile time, but if you get access to the object in your browser through your JavaScript console, you can call any method. They're all public. it doesn't actually make them private according to like the new JavaScript standard. And if you have a JavaScript private, then the engine will prevent you from calling it because it's actually private, So there's that. And in there's no explicit there's no explicit public modifier. Everything's public except for things that are private, and private things are explicitly private. You have to name them with like a hash in front of the thing, which is really ugly syntax. I really don't like it, but whatever. It is what it is. And for me, for the longest time, I have been of an opinion that if a compiler can derive some type by itself, let it. So do not put like types on things that are obvious because the compiler can figure it out. But recently, in the latest version of TypeScript, like 5.6, is it now? They've added this thing. They're basically saying that when it comes the time to come up with the definition files for external consumers, the compiler needs to do a lot of work figuring out types through import chains to kind of come to the conclusion of what a type of certain thing should be. So it takes it takes a really long time, relatively, compared to the overall compilation process to get all of that information. And so they have this new thing where you can enable a flag that basically forces you to put types on exported things, so it doesn't have to traverse your import graph to figure it out. It can just say, okay, that's what's exported, and just chuck it into the declaration file and be done with it to kind of save on compile times. But that means they have to manually put return types on functions that are exported and things of that nature, so it doesn't have to do the work. And I'm like, in this particular case, I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, but is it that big of a deal? I guess for some projects it could be. But for my particular case, I rather have it derive it automatically. And so in that same nature, if a thing is public by default, it's public by default. Like, you don't have to re-establish that.
Yeah, true. Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's kind of like, readability is a skill issue after all.
It is indeed. And I am starting to learn that, because even in our conversation today, you were saying someone prefers to read all their functions in one block. I'm starting to feel like maybe readability is subjective or relative. I don't know how to say that.
No, it is. It
depends on you.
Like for a newbie, it's gonna take much longer to read the exact same piece of code that it takes for you. If you've been doing it, and I've seen that, especially like with complete newbies when I was doing the TAing at a boot camp. Like, I could run this function in my brain by looking at it and they would have to spend like 10 minutes trying to step by step go through it and figure out what it does. So it is a skill, right? Like, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And so eventually it's not that big a deal,
Yeah, and I also noticed that there are a few more factors that affect everyone in terms of like being able to read code. I think some people are able to read leaner set of, when the code is lean, like there's not a lot of code in there, it's easier to read for certain people. And some people find more convenience in reading like those chunky codes where like everything is together, like there's no space. Like, I don't know. I mean, I was learning about I think there is a personality type, or so maybe it's a
trait.
It's a bit complicated. Yeah, like it's a psychological part of it, like psychology to it. But I think sometimes like there are certain people who prefer codes written certain way. But I'm starting to wonder, like, there is no real standard that works for everyone when it comes to readability, or is there?
I mean, there are some standards. I mean, if you install some tools, it's like, oh yeah, just install Airbnb format guide or whatever style
No, no,
guide.
this is not what I'm like. This there is formatting,
But
and this format.
it's not just the formatting. It's also things like naming. I think every company kind of has their own flavor of it, and there isn't like there's not one true way of doing it. Everybody can do whatever they want, and I think that that's fine. You just have to come up with something that you can work with and people around you can work with, and it's all good.
Yeah, I think so. This is where I say like what you can work with and what people around you can work with. This is why I'm starting to feel like it is probably um a relative thing. When it
Yeah,
comes to readability, like you say, oh yeah, I'm trying to make this code readable, and then for you, you make it look nice, and it looks
it's like
nice and neat
readable
to
for
you,
me. Yeah.
readable to you, and someone else can come and look at it like, I can't really read
I
what
mean,
you've
there
written
there
here.
are I would say there are objective criteria too. Like there's a lot to be said about naming things appropriately according to like what it actually does and what like I see so much bad naming that it really like that too is a skill, like picking a correct name that highlights what it does. And then the other part is actually, sticking to the promise of the name and actually delivering on it, or at least keeping that stuff in sync. Because how many
Yeah.
times have I seen things where if there's a function, it has a like a doc string and it has an implementation, and the name says one thing, the implementation does another, and then the doc string says yet another thing. So none of them agree in terms of what this function actually does, and that is the
Mhm.
worst. So,
Mhm.
name your variables appropriately, name your functions appropriately. There is
Yeah.
something to be said about splitting things. It's very subjective, and it's one of those you know it when you see it, because sometimes you can look at some code and be like, "Oh my god, this is terrible." But even then, as I was saying this, I was just thinking that like, I can't read assembly. I mean, I know what
What?
assembly looks like, like code written in assembler. Uh,
Why? I mean, but go on.
Uh,
Is there like a specific reason or like?
well, whenever I read some security related things about like some exploits or something, there's bound to be a bunch of assembly code in there somewhere in terms of like how they do the exploitation or what the problem with the original code was. Sometimes it's in C, but there are times when it's in assembly, especially when somebody's doing like some reverse engineering of something. All you get is assembly usually, right? And I cannot read assembly
Mhm.
because I never practiced it. And so when I look at it, I'm like, I cannot read this. I mean, I can read it, but I cannot, the same way that I can run the JavaScript code in my brain by just looking at it, I cannot do the same thing for assembly because I haven't practiced it. But for somebody who's in security research and who's doing reverse engineering every day, they can probably look at it and run it in their brain the same way I do with JavaScript. And so it's a skill, right? So,
I mean, absolutely.
but
But
there is still shit code that is really painful to read. So it's it's kind of objective and kind of subjective at the same time. There are certainly things where you look at it like, oh my god, this is terrible. And sometimes you look at it, it's like it's dense, it's compact, it's not in a style that I'm accustomed to, but I can't see anything like obviously wrong with it except that it's not in a style that I'm used to.
you know what? This is exactly what I was saying. Cause there is this I don't know if you know Uncle Bob, clean code. I mean, there is a guy who is supposed to be like the preacher of clean code. Like.
Does he offer consulting services?
I think he does.
Well, that's the
I have
I don't know. To me, that's the
one
kind of
of
thing
his.
you have to look at. It's like they're trying to sell you some style or methodology, and if they
Mhm.
offer commercial services for that methodology at the same time, it's like, hmm,
Well,
interesting.
business is business, but
Business is business,
but
fair, but you know, um,
Mhm.
I don't know.
I mean,
That one episode when the company hired a agile consultant and it was just such a joke. That just put me off the whole thing for such a long time because it's like it was just a grift in its cleanest, purest form. Just somebody came in, did a bunch of presentations that didn't change anything, put a bunch of silly posters that didn't change anything, collected probably $100,000 paycheck and rode off into the sunset, and we remained pretty much more in the same
oh,
spot
wait,
where we were, but
we're talking
everyone
about
was
right
like,
now.
no, that was years back, not right now.
Oh, because that would have been funny. It would have been funny if it was like right now. Like
Well,
somewhere.
I mean, okay, I can be silly, but I'm not gonna be poo-pooing the company I'm currently working for on air. I'm not that stupid.
No, I mean it would have been funnier actually. Like if there is like a company that's still, I mean, but
They
maybe
probably
there is a
have some
difference.
consultant for some subject or the other that I don't interface with personally, whom they are paying a lot of money to do something that they think will bring them value, and it probably won't. Like any big company, it's with the parallel to nature, if you have a big shark swimming around, there's going to be plenty of tiny fish swimming in its slipstream trying to feed on the crumbs left over. So
Hmm.
a lot of these weird consultants are there. It's like, ooh, a big company with a lot of money and not enough transparency and clarity. We can sell some methodology here, and then they fuck off, and you're left there dealing with that BS. And whether or not that was applicable in the first case or not, who the hell knows? But they managed to sell it to somebody that does not interface directly with the problem. Like they sell it to a VP of engineering saying, "Oh, your developers 4 levels down are doing something you never see during your day-to-day because that's not your job, and we can make it better." And the guy is like, "Okay, yeah, makes sense." He never sees the actual change because he
Yeah,
does not
yeah.
operate on that level, but he's the one signing the check for the consultant. And so, it's all about a good sales pitch, and they collect their money, and then the engineers 4 levels down are like, what the hell is this shit? Like, who asked for this?
Business is business. Business is business. Business is business. I was gonna say Uncle Bob has like some set of like I don't even know where I was going with it. Like he's very he's known to have like the old clean code. Like I have one of his book,
Yeah,
and at some point I realized that I mean to be fair, um for me it's clean and I appreciate the way he writes.
yeah,
But I noticed that I've seen other people swear that they write clean code, and sometimes I struggle to read what they write. It's not because it's not working, it's just the way they organize the code.
yeah,
Do you understand? Like it's not like so also like one time I saw this really complex React code. Like it's a very chunky React, JSX10, like there's template here, like everything.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that took me like I mean I know what's going on. I can read, but
yeah,
yeah, my eyes were like,
yeah. Fair enough.
please.
Well, what was I gonna say? I was gonna say that, like, I haven't read Clean Code, I haven't read The Gang of Four, I haven't read any of the fancy books, and I remember what I was gonna say. In terms of complexity, I'm always in favor of making things simpler. But I do understand that sometimes if you're working on a problem long enough, you go through a series of refactorings, and depending on how good you are at identifying like the XY problem, the cleaner your end result will be. Because you start working on something, you encounter some issue. Now
Mhm.
you need to resolve that issue. You add some complexity to resolve that issue. Maybe that's not even the issue that you're having. You just think that it is, and you're like writing code around it to fix it. So you've increased your complexity. And then, there's like a series of these things where you haven't cleanly identified what the problem was, and you're just treating the symptoms around it, and you come up with this
Mm,
monstrosity that solves the problem as originally stated. But because those intermediate steps weren't like, those weren't the droids you were looking for. You were solving things that only somewhat relate to the actual problem that you had. It's like, oh, I don't know, in Angular applications, like, oh, I have this weird thing that doesn't render correctly, so I'm just gonna chuck a set timeout in there to fix it, right? And that causes some other problem down the line, and then you fix that thing with some other hack, and then you fix that thing with some other hack. Where what you should have done is go back to the beginning, is like, why are these events not called in the sequence that they're supposed to be called in? So you don't need all those dirty hacks to make it work. But that series of hacks turned it into some monster that now you have to deal with because you weren't able to cut to the root of it from the start. And that's a skill thing too, is the ability to kind of just jump through these logical chains and say, this is likely going to work, this is likely not going to work. The exploration, it's like digging on the archaeological site. Like, you have all this dirt on the side of your area, and the more you work there, the larger that pile becomes. Because, like, if you knew exactly where your artifact was, you could dig like a tiny hole straight through it and like remove this much earth and uncover it. But you have to dig out this massive hole with like tons and tons of dirt to arrive at what you're looking for. And by the end, all that dirt is still there. Like, you haven't really done anything with it. And so if you know exactly what the solution is, you can come up with a clean solution to it. But if you don't, it's a process, and you pile up all of this crap on the sides that you're just left with by the time you're done.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, all of this would probably be easier to say. This is why I think, like, even if you're writing like you're putting a patch, like a band-aid on a situation, I still think it should be properly organized, because then it will be easier to read. It will be easier to look into. Like, if it's and anyway, I was trying to explain like the psychological part of reading, that I think it's like one of those things with people with how do you say that thing? Um, like
OCD.
people who, yeah, there is this, and then there's also the people who miss like letters and like
Okay, I see
words.
what you mean. What's the
I
word I'm
forgot
looking
that name.
for?
I forgot the word now.
Dyslexia?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. I think there are people on this spectrum who also struggle to read like certain, if it's arranged in a certain way, and they are, aside from dyslexia, they are also like other people. So for me, I think I've gotten to a point where I'm starting to accept it. Like, I don't think that there is one formula to say like, oh, this is a readable code. I think it is probably subjective to some extent. Also, there is also some fundamentals to it. At least, like, have good spacing, proper formats, and all these kind of things. But at the end of the day, if function in a function works for you, I guess it is what it is.
Send me the thing. I want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not against it. It's just like, it's not the first thing I would think of. And
maybe there's a reason for it. I'd like to see it. But
for sure, you know what? I will try to find a blog on that. It's one of those blogs on Medium.
Fair enough. In terms of clean code, I would say that the code you're gonna write tomorrow is probably gonna be a little bit cleaner than the code you wrote yesterday. And if you just look at your own code from a year ago, you'd be like, who is this idiot? So it's a process. It's growth, right? And it's acquiring the skill, so you get better. The more you do it, so do more of it, and you'll get better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was gonna ask you another question, but I think we're almost at the 1 hour mark.
Yeah, we are.
It was about subscriptions, but we can talk about that next week.
Yeah.
We'll keep it to next week.
There's always next week.
So, thank you, Vasily.
Thank you, Mo.
For your time.
And thank you, everyone. If you're still watching and spending your precious time on our thing, as opposed to enjoying nature, it's an odd choice, but hey, we're happy you're here. And we'll see you in the next one. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.